So on Twitter today, there was an article about an author wrote about reading a research paper, and it explained why this author was unable to make a high school lacrosse team. And so the research that the author cited is a paper by McNamara and colleagues from 2014. And essentially the paper found that only 18% of the variance between experts and non-expert is attributable to deliberate practice. So the vast majority of the difference between an expert and a non-expert is genetic factors, environment, something other than deliberate practice. And I think, if we thought hard about it, this makes sense. Regardless of how much I practice, I'm not going to be LeBron James. We have different genes, in terms of size, strength, muscle fiber, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm never going to, through practice, be able to become 6'8", or have that kind of muscle mass and that kind of speed and jumping ability, et cetera. So again, this kind of goes back to what I talked about last week, the abilities creating potential for skills. And so the problem with the article that I read today is that the author took this article that was about elite performance and generalized it to his or her making a high school team. Now, a high school team is filled with non-elite athletes. So I think the stats that I read yesterday said something like 0.01% of high school varsity athletes go on to play professionally, right? So that means there's tens of thousands of high school athletes that don't become elite athletes. And so this is the area where most people will end their careers as a high school athlete, a non-elite. Because despite the labels that we put on children these days, I just don't think that anybody at that age is truly elite. I think you reach the elite level when you've made a professional team or a national team or something like that. So just being a high school athlete is great, but it's not a sign that one is elite. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. And for an article to suggest that making a high school team is 100% genetic, or all but 18% genetic, I think that's a dangerous message to send to parents and children. So I think at the high school level, there are many other factors beyond just your genes that will enable you to make a team. And part of that is simply that there's a much larger pool from which high school athletes are drawn. At the NBA, you take the best 400 players in the entire world make the NBA. At a local high school, let's say you have 1,000 students in the school, and 12 to 15 make the varsity team. So your odds just based on that are much improved, let's say. And so it doesn't require you to be a genetic freak to make a high school team. Almost anybody with enough practice and dedication can probably make a high school team in some sport, especially because a lot of sports don't even cut at the high school level. So I know at my school, I think only 2 or 3 sports really cut. Basketball and soccer and baseball, I think, were the only sports that cut. If you wanted to play football, they'd put you on the team. If you wanted to play rugby, they'd put you on the team. If you wanted to swim, you're on the team. If you want to run track and field, you're on the team. So you're a high school athlete. So that doesn't mean you're great. It doesn't mean you're going to go on to an elite level. But if the article is more talking about participation in high school sports. So, again, it's a dangerous message to say that you have to have the right genes and genetic factors is why one isn't a good high school athlete. And again, there definitely is a genetic component to being able to play a high school sport. So in this case, the author spoke about lacrosse. And then specifically passing and catching a lacrosse ball. Certainly a skill, a complex skill, because not only are you passing and catching, but you're doing it with an instrument as opposed to your hands or your feet. So it's more complex than even playing baseball or playing basketball because of the stick. Hockey, ice hockey, field hockey would be the same thing. So there's definitely skill involved that you have to learn. And that skill then is based on some of the abilities. So especially hand-eye coordination, multi-limb coordination, dexterity, things like this. And if you lack those basic abilities, then you're probably not going to be a good lacrosse player. But everybody has those abilities to some extent. Everybody has some form of hand-eye coordination. Everybody has some form of multi-limb coordination. Everybody has some form of dexterity. It might not be great. It might not be enough to make it to an elite level, but you have some on which that you can practice and probably become better at skills that are based on those abilities. Furthermore, I think the important message that we need to learn, not knowing anything about this author's background, is I think to make sure that we develop those abilities and maximize the potential that those abilities will allow, we need early exposure to activities that involve those abilities. So from a catching and throwing standpoint, as a child, let's say I want to make a lacrosse team in high school. I can't wait until middle school or high school to be involved in catching and throwing activities. Now, depending on the success of the team, I may be able to pick up lacrosse late in my development. So when I was in high school, I know I had a friend who, a lacrosse coach at a local college, said, hey, you're good at baseball, you're good at soccer, you're not good enough to get a scholarship in baseball or soccer, but I think you can make my lacrosse team because you have the basic abilities that will probably allow you to become a good lacrosse player. So even though he hadn't learned the skills, he had enough ability that the coach thought that he could quickly learn the skills and become a good player. So I don't think the message that I'm saying isn't that we need to specialize in a specific sport at an early age, but I do think we need to be exposed to the basic motor skills at early ages. So that might mean, if I want to be a lacrosse player in high school, that might mean that at a young age, I just need to play catch with somebody, in the backyard. Footballs, beanbags, tennis balls, baseballs, whatever, just pass and catch. Playing frisbee, something like that. So just basic activities that at a young age that start to develop the ability that's already kind of genetic or innate. Because if I never engage in activities that allow for that ability to express itself, then I think at some point you lose the opportunity to really maximize that potential. So if I grow up and I never pass and catch or do anything with a ball, up until I'm in high school, I'm probably not going to be able to catch up. But if I'm like my friend who was a good athlete, lots of baseball, lots of soccer, he could probably adjust and adapt to a new sport because he has those basic motor skills within him, and they've developed over a number of years, and he's improved, and he's shown that he can learn skills. So to go from throwing a baseball to throwing a lacrosse ball, he probably just has to learn the basic technique. Through soccer, he knows the basic tactics to some degree. So again, my basic message or my thoughts on the article is, the research that it's based on is good. I'm not criticizing the research in any way, but I think it's dangerous when we try to generalize an article that's about expert performance down to high school sports. High school sports are not elite. They're not a sign of expert performance. And so to generalize to that extent, I think is dangerous. And I think players and children can develop into high school athletes without having to have a great, genetic predisposition to be, an expert in that activity. Their careers likely will end in high school if they don't have that genetic predisposition. But that doesn't mean that we should discourage the effort to become a high school athlete, because it's, especially in this day and age, increasing physical activity and developing motor skills is one of the best things that we can do to encourage both physical activity in childhood, but also lifelong physical activity into adulthood and beyond. So, again, I think this article was a little bit simplistic and a little bit dangerous, so I want to comment on it. abilities definitely play a role, genes definitely play a role, but I think if you can start in early activities and sample as many sports, as many activities as possible to develop as many different motor skills, I think that gives you a chance to play as long as possible, to maximize whatever innate gifts that you have.